Welcome back to True Crime After Dark, where we unravel the darkest corners of the human mind. It's supposed to be the vacation of a lifetime, a week in paradise aboard a floating city, the Royal Caribbean cruise ship Rhapsody of the Seas, thousands of passengers, endless food, music, and sun. A place where every detail is managed, every corner is lit, every movement accounted for. Safe, controlled, perfect. But on the morning of March 23, 1998, the illusion shattered. A 23-year-old woman, vibrant, athletic, and just beginning her adult life, vanished from the ship without a trace. Gone by sunrise. No alarm, no announcement, no explanation. Her name was Amy Lynn Bradley. And more than 2 decades later, her disappearance remains one of the most disturbing maritime mysteries of our time. Was Amy the victim of a tragic accident? Did she willingly leave her family behind? Or was she taken into the shadows of a human trafficking network that preyed on unsuspecting women in paradise? Tonight, we travel back to that cruise, to that night, and to every chilling lead that followed. Because Amy's story isn't just about what was lost at sea. It's about a family's relentless fight against silence, bureaucracy, and the possibility that their daughter was alive for years after the world declared her gone. Before we talk about what happened to Amy Lynn Bradley, we need to understand who she was. Because knowing Amy isn't just knowing a victim. It's knowing the fire, the life, the personality that still echoes through every unanswered question. Amy was born on May 12, 1974, in Petersburg, Virginia. She grew up with her parents, Ron and Iva, and her younger brother Brad in Chesterfield County. From the start, she stood out. She was athletic, a natural competitor. She played basketball in high school and then at Longwood University, where she also earned a degree in physical education. Teammates remembered her as a leader. She wasn't the type to back down, not on the court and not in life. But Amy wasn't defined only by sports. She was artistic and expressive, and she marked her independence in ways that made her unforgettable. She had several tattoos, a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball on her shoulder, a gecko around her belly button, a sun on her lower back, and a Chinese symbol on her ankle. These weren't just decoration, they were statements. They told the world who she was. At 23, Amy was stepping into adulthood with momentum. She had just adopted a puppy she named Daisy. She had started working at a computer consulting firm. She was responsible, ambitious, but also free-spirited. She wasn't afraid to laugh loudly, to challenge people, or to stand her ground. Her bond with her family was unshakable. Her parents described her as protective of her younger brother, Brad. The two were close. Siblings who teased each other, joked constantly, but also had each other's backs in ways only brothers and sisters can. This wasn't a woman who was drifting through life. Amy had plans. She had a future. She had roots that mattered. A job, a dog, a family who loved her fiercely. And that's what makes what happened next so haunting. The Rhapsody of the Seas wasn't just a cruise ship. It was a floating world. 15 decks high, more than 900 feet long, carrying over 2,000 passengers and close to 800 crew members. To anyone who stepped on board, it looked and felt like a self-contained city. Shops, restaurants, pools, casinos, gyms, theaters, and lounges, everything you could want in a vacation was at your fingertips. For the Bradley family, it was meant to be the trip of a lifetime. Ron and Iva had booked the cruise as a celebratory getaway, one last family adventure before Amy and Brad dove fully into adulthood. Amy had just begun her career, Brad was in college, and their parents wanted a chance to enjoy their children in a carefree setting. No jobs, no stress, just sunshine and ocean. When the family boarded in Puerto Rico on March 21, 1998, everything looked perfect. The stateroom was small but comfortable, 2 twin beds pushed together for Ron and Iva, a couch that converted into a bed for Amy, and a pull-down bunk for Brad. From their balcony, they could see the turquoise waters stretch endlessly, glittering in the sunlight. But Amy wasn't entirely comfortable. Friends later said she'd confided before leaving that cruises made her uneasy. Something about being trapped on a ship in the middle of the ocean with thousands of strangers gave her an ominous feeling. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside. She wasn't about to let fear ruin her family's vacation. Life on board followed a predictable rhythm. Breakfast buffets in the morning, shore excursions in the afternoon, dinners in the massive dining room, and at night the ship came alive. Music, dancing, cocktails, and laughter filled every lounge. For the first 2 days, the Bradleys embraced it. They lounged by the pool, played cards, and enjoyed family time. But beneath the surface of this tropical dream, something darker was moving. Amy noticed things others might not have. Men stared at her in ways that made her uncomfortable. Crew members in particular seemed overly interested in her. Iva later recalled her daughter telling her she didn't feel entirely safe walking alone. It was the kind of comment a mother tucks away in the back of her mind, hoping it's just nerves, not a warning. That unease would prove to be more than just instinct. The third night felt different the moment the sun slipped under the horizon. Warm wind skimmed the open decks, steel cables hummed, and the rhapsody of the seas shifted to her nighttime heartbeat. Ice clinking in highball glasses, slot machines stuttering, and a low thump of bass leaking from the lounges. Amy dressed casual athletic, clean lines, no fuss, hair pulled back so she could dance without thinking about it. Brad joked that she'd outlast the band. "Bet you quit before I do," she shot back, that sideways smile her family knew meant game on. They followed the sound to a midship lounge where the Caribbean cover band Blue Orchid was setting the pace. Reggae-leaning grooves, chorus hooks everybody knew by the second verse. The lighting washed the room in teal and amber, making every table look like a little island. Amy and Brad found a sliver of floor near the stage. She moved like a former athlete, loose, strong, unself-conscious, drawing eyes without trying. One of the musicians, nicknamed Yellow by passengers, noticed too. He worked the crowd between songs, easy grin, the kind of charm cruise ships hire on purpose. When the band slid into another danceable number, Amy didn't hesitate. She met the rhythm head-on. Brad hovered nearby, protective but relaxed, clocking exits and faces like brothers do. He later recalled the ratio everyone wonders about. Yes, they were drinking. No, neither was sloppy. They were clear, social, riding the high of a good night. The hours elasticized the way they do at sea. People came and went. The same 10 couples kept the floor warm. At the bar, crew filtered through in uniforms half unbuttoned from a long shift. Amy's laugh carried over the snare and hi-hat. She wasn't flirting so much as inhabiting the music. Close to 3:30 a.m., the room thinned. The band wound down to a final set, thanked the crowd, and began coiling cables. Amy and Brad stepped into the corridor's cooler air. Brad suggested late food. Amy vetoed, "I'm good." They took the quiet route back, passing framed prints of sail plans and tropical ports, elevator mirrors reflecting them in triplicate. Cameras in the ceiling domes watched in silence, or should have. They eased open the stateroom door. Their parents were asleep. Brad hit the bunk and was out within minutes. He'd say later it felt like blinking. Amy washed her face, set a glass of water on the small table, then drifted to the balcony drawn by the sound, the endless hush and crash of black water on black hull. 5:10, 5:20 a.m., balcony light. Her father Ron stirred to the soft scrape of the sliding door, padded out, and joined her. The horizon was still a suggestion. Curiaco's shorelights blinked faintly like a necklace laid on velvet. Amy lit a cigarette, cupping the flame against the wind. They spoke the way families do at the end of a good day. Small things, tomorrow's plan, a half-formed joke. Ron registered something quieter beneath her calm. That post-dance adrenaline, a mind not ready to sleep. She was barefoot. Her sandals sat inside by the threshold. No purse, no ID, no intention of going far. Ron squeezed her shoulder, "Don't stay up too long, kiddo," and went back in. The door whispered shut. Behind it, the room breathed. Iva's steady sleep, Brad's heavy post-party silence, the AC's low rasp. Outside, Amy leaned on the rail. A lifeguard's daughter looking into water she respected but did not fear. 5:30, 5:45 a.m. The ship turns below, deckhands ghosted through their routines. Hoses, squeegees, morning prep. Somewhere aft, a crew stairwell door clanged and quieted. Inside the lounge, 2 floors down, a cleaner pushed a cart past the stage where the mic stands waited like silhouettes. On a closed-circuit monitor in a security room, cameras cycled hallways and lifts in grayscale. If Amy stepped inside, a lens might have caught the barest flicker of her profile. If. What happened next is the first fracture in the timeline. A handful of passengers later said they saw a woman matching Amy's look near the elevators around dawn. One placed yellow in the same vicinity. Another mentioned two men in crew attire on an early deck. None of those threads were tied in real time. On the balcony, Dawn lifted a shade lighter. The ship angled toward port. A gull looped and vanished. 5:55. 6:05 a.m. Absence. When Ron woke again, it felt like minutes had passed. The balcony was empty. The glass still held the print of fingers. Inside, the sandals waited, purse closed, ID untouched. The lighter was gone. The cigarettes, too. He checked the bathroom, knocked on Brad's frame, called Amy's name the way you do when you're sure you'll hear, "Yeah?" from the next room. Silence. He slid the balcony door once more, as if she might be hidden by the angle of dawn. Nothing. The setup for morning. By 6:10 a.m., the ship's PA crackled with crew-only logistics. Coffee carafes rolled into place. Tour operators idled on shore with clipboards and vans. In less than an hour, thousands of feet would cross the gateway. If a decision had to be made to freeze the ship, this was the window. If a conversation with security needed urgency, this was the breath to take it. Inside cabin 9252, a father's pulse sped. He woke Iva. He shook Brad. Three people who loved Amy more than air stood in a room that insisted she had simply stepped out. But the details, the sandals, the ID, the open horizon, whispered something else. They didn't know it, but the decisions that would follow in the next 60 minutes would define the case for decades. The digital clock in the cabin read 6:10 a.m. The Bradley family was awake now, hearts pounding with that instinctive alarm that something was very, very wrong. Ron had already checked the balcony twice. The sandals were still inside, her purse untouched, her ID untouched. Amy had not gone far. She couldn't have, but she was gone all the same. Brad rubbed the sleep from his eyes, confusion turning to dread as his father repeated the words, "She's not here. Amy's not here." Iva's mind was spinning. She remembered her daughter's unease before the trip, her nervous laugh when she'd admitted she didn't like the idea of cruises. "Too many strangers," she'd said, and now that fear had crystallized into reality. 6:20 a.m. The first search. They split up. Brad darted through corridors, checking the elevators, sprinting past startled early risers. He burst onto the pool deck, scanning row after row of empty lounge chairs slick with dew. Crew members hosed down the tiles, barely glancing at him as he called out his sister's name. Ron checked the casino. The whir of slot machines already filled the room as night owls fed coins into blinking lights. He asked every passenger he passed, "Have you seen my daughter? She's 23, brown hair, tattoos, shakes of the head, blank stares, a polite, 'Sorry, sir.'" Iva searched the quiet dining area, weaving between breakfast tables where a handful of early risers sipped coffee. Nothing. The minutes bled together. No one had seen Amy. No one even seemed alarmed. 6:45 a.m. The plea. By 6:45 a.m., the family converged at the purser's desk, the hub of passenger information. Their voices were urgent, cracking, desperate. "Please," Ron begged, "make an announcement. Just call her name. If she's anywhere on the ship, she'll hear it." The staff shook their heads. They said it was too early to disturb the passengers. Amy was probably sleeping in a lounge chair or had made friends and stayed out. They told the Bradleys not to worry. But the Bradleys knew better. Amy wasn't careless. She wasn't thoughtless, and she wasn't the type to vanish without her shoes, ID, or a word to anyone. That refusal, that single decision not to make an announcement, would haunt the family for the rest of their lives. 7 a.m. The gateway opens. At 7 a.m. sharp, the Rhapsody of the Seas dropped anchor in Curiaco. The gateway was lowered, and passengers began to pour off the ship. The Bradleys panicked. They rushed to the captain, begging him to hold the disembarkation until Amy was found. But the captain refused. The schedule was the priority. Passengers had excursions booked, tours waiting, beaches to visit, and so the floodgates opened. Hundreds, then thousands of people streamed onto the pier. Families with beach bags, couples with cameras, crew members on break. Anyone could have walked off that ship carrying Amy, and no one would have noticed. The Bradleys stood there helpless, watching the crowd disappear into the streets of Curiaco. They later said it felt like watching Amy slip further and further away, swallowed by the noise of the port city. 7:30 a.m., the clock ticks. The family searched again. Brad retraced every step, pounding down stairwells, checking the fitness center, the clubs, even crew-only corridors when no one was looking. Ron walked every deck, stopping strangers, repeating Amy's description until his throat went raw. Iva sat in the cabin staring at the balcony, whispering prayers under her breath. Every time the door slid open, her heart leapt, but it was never Amy. By mid-morning, their hope was turning into horror. The ship had not been locked down, the passengers had not been stopped, and their daughter, their vibrant, fearless 23-year-old Amy, was gone. Setting the stage, this was the moment investigators later called the fatal mistake. The first hours, the most important hours in any missing persons case, were wasted. No announcements, no lockdown, no coordinated search. And as the ship emptied into Curacao, so too did Amy's trail. Leave a like, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep bringing you the truth that matters. As the sun rose higher over Curacao, the Bradleys were already exhausted from hours of searching. The corridors, the pool deck, the dining hall, everywhere they looked, Amy wasn't there. But whispers began to reach them. Strangers leaned in with uneasy voices, passengers stopped them in hallways, and bits of information trickled through the crowd. Amy hadn't simply vanished into thin air. The elevator citing one passenger recalled something odd. In the gray light of early morning, around 5:45 or 6 a.m., they had seen a young woman near the elevators. She was tall, athletic, with brown hair pulled back. Details that matched Amy exactly. And she wasn't alone. Standing near her, leaning against the wall, was a man from the band Blue Orchid. His nickname was Yellow. The witness didn't know his real name, only that he had been performing the night before and had danced with Amy until the early hours. They had laughed together, shared the rhythm, moving to the same beat as the crowd thinned. And now, hours later, he was still with her? The image burned into the Bradleys' minds. If true, this sighting meant Amy had been alive after Ron last saw her on the balcony. It meant she was moving about the ship while her family slept, and she was with someone who worked there. The deck sighting. Another passenger came forward. They thought they had seen Amy walking along one of the open decks that morning. She wasn't barefoot. She wasn't lounging in a chair. She was walking quickly, flanked by two men who appeared to be crew members. The witness admitted they didn't get a perfect look. The men were in uniforms, but whether they were maintenance staff, waiters, or security wasn't clear. What was clear was the impression. Amy didn't look relaxed. She looked like she was being led. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it added fuel to the family's worst fear, that Amy hadn't left voluntarily. The crew's behavior. Iva would later say she noticed something unsettling about the crew even before Amy disappeared. Men stared at her daughter too long. They offered too much attention. Now, in the aftermath of Amy's vanishing, those stares seemed darker, more suspicious. Some crew members avoided eye contact when the Bradleys asked questions. Others shrugged, offering the same dismissive answer, "She's probably with friends." But the Bradleys knew their daughter. Amy wasn't naive. She wouldn't wander into danger without realizing it. If she left with someone, it meant she trusted them, or she had been coerced. The shadow of Yellow. The name that kept surfacing was Yellow. The musician had been one of the last people to see Amy alive. He had been close to her that night on the dance floor, and according to at least one passenger, he was with her near the elevators after 5:30 a.m. Later, when questioned, Yellow denied any involvement. He said he hadn't seen her after the band's set ended. But the whispers didn't die. The Bradleys couldn't shake the suspicion that he knew more than he was saying. And if he had been with her, why hadn't he come forward immediately? Foul play in paradise. By midday, the Bradleys no longer believed Amy had fallen overboard. She was strong, careful, and cautious. No, this was something else. Ron later said, "We knew right away it wasn't an accident. Amy was taken." The rumors of sightings with Yellow, the whispers of two crew members walking with her, the way the staff dismissed their pleas. The picture was forming, but the answers were missing. And the cruise ship, the one place Amy had to be if she hadn't been taken ashore already, was slipping further and further out of the family's control. The Bradleys' voices were hoarse by mid-morning, worn raw from calling Amy's name into hallways that swallowed sound and gave nothing back. They weren't just searching anymore, they were begging, but the ship itself seemed to resist them. The empty promises. The purser's desk repeated the same lines over and over. "We're searching, we'll let you know. Don't worry, she'll turn up." But to the Bradleys' eyes, there was no search. Crew members strolled casually through public areas, peeking half-heartedly into lounges. There was no urgency, no lockdown. Nobody was ordered to remain in their cabin. Nobody was stopped from moving about freely. Ron would later say it felt like a show, a performance of concern without the action to back it up. And every minute that passed, the clock ticked louder. 7 a.m. docking. At exactly 7 a.m., the Rhapsody of the Seas docked in Curiaco. The massive ship loomed over the pier, her hull dwarfing the small taxis and vans waiting below. Tour guides with clipboards shouted for passengers, waving signs for scuba trips and island tours. The gateway was lowered, and the first wave of passengers began to disembark. The Bradleys rushed to the captain. Ron's voice was sharp, desperate. "You cannot let them off! Not until Amy is found! Please, hold them back! Seal the ship!" But the answer was cold. No. The cruise had a schedule. Excursions had been booked. They couldn't hold thousands of paying passengers for one missing woman. And so the stream of people continued, hundreds, then thousands, flooding into Curiaco. Families with cameras, couples in sunglasses, crew members slipping into town on their off hours. Anyone could have been with Amy. Anyone could have taken her off that ship and vanished into the island. And once she was gone, the trail would be nearly impossible to follow. The window closes. Investigators always stress the same thing. The first 24 hours are critical. That's when the evidence is freshest, when witnesses remember clearly, when the trail is still warm. For Amy Lynn Bradley, that window slammed shut before it even opened. No announcement had been made. No cabins had been searched. No gateway had been locked. The most basic steps of containment, the steps that could have saved her, were ignored. The family's horror. The Bradleys stood at the railing, watching the pier fill with people. Their daughter could have been among them, disguised, coerced, forced into silence. Or she could have already been hidden in some corner of the island beyond their reach. Iva later said, "It felt like she was slipping away from us in front of our eyes, and no one cared enough to stop it." Ron clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. Brad punched the wall of the corridor in frustration. They could do nothing but watch, powerless in the place where their daughter had vanished. A systemic failure. Looking back, experts have called the cruise line's response one of the greatest failures in the case. The refusal to make a simple announcement, the refusal to lock down the ship, the refusal to delay docking. Each decision compounded the damage. Each choice allowed Amy to vanish more completely. What could have been a solvable mystery in the first hours had already become a ghost story by mid-morning. The first day ends. By the time evening fell on March 23rd, Amy Lynn Bradley was no longer just missing. She was gone. The ship's routines continued. Passengers returned from beaches and shopping trips. Dinner was served in the glittering dining room. Laughter and music filled the lounges once more. But for the Bradleys, time had stopped. Their daughter was missing. Their pleas had been ignored, and the haunting possibility settled over them like a shroud. Amy might never be seen again. The first day ended not with answers, but with silence. As the Caribbean sun dropped behind Curaçao and the island lights blinked to life, the Bradleys felt the weight of a nightmare settling in. While other passengers laughed over cocktails, strolled the decks, and enjoyed their shore excursions, Ron and Iva sat in their stateroom, staring at the door, waiting for Amy to walk back through it. Brad paced the hallway, exhaustion and adrenaline tearing at him, anger simmering at the thought of how little had been done. The cruise line carried on as if nothing had happened. Dinner was served. Drinks were poured. The band struck up again in the lounge where Amy had danced the night before, and through it all, the family could feel the world moving forward, leaving them behind in an agony no one else seemed to share. By the following morning, the FBI had been contacted, but the investigation was already crippled by jurisdictional nightmares. Amy had disappeared in international waters, which meant responsibility shifted between agencies like a hot stone. The Antilles authorities had their say, local law enforcement in Curiacao tried to involve themselves, and Royal Caribbean's legal team stepped in, guarding their image. It was the worst possible scenario for a family desperate for action. What they needed was urgency, lockdowns, and questioning of every crew member and passenger. What they got was bureaucracy, hesitation, and confusion. Witnesses were spoken to, but too late. Stories began to blur. Some insisted they saw Amy near the elevators in the early hours, standing with Yellow, the musician from Blue Orchid. Others said she was walking on deck, flanked by men in crew uniforms, her body language uneasy, as though she wasn't free to move on her own. These were crucial details that should have been pinned down within hours. Instead, they drifted, unreliable, their power diluted by time. And then there was Yellow himself, the man who had danced with Amy into the night. He claimed he knew nothing, that he hadn't seen her after the set. His words were taken at face value. He wasn't detained, he wasn't questioned aggressively. He simply slipped back into the background of the ship. For Ron and Iva, that negligence burned. Days passed, and the ship sailed on. Each morning, the Bradleys awoke to the sound of waves against the hull, the sickening reminder that Amy had vanished into the same endless water, or worse, into the shadows of human trafficking that haunted every rumor that followed. And then came the first chilling report from off the ship. In 1999, a Canadian tourist vacationing in Curiacao claimed he saw Amy walking on a beach with two men. He remembered her tattoos clearly, the sun on her lower back, the Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball on her shoulder. He didn't know her story at the time, didn't realize he was looking at a missing woman whose face was on FBI posters. Only later, when the case made headlines, did the memory click. The Bradleys clung to that sighting, fragile as it was. Hope mixed with horror. If Amy was alive, it meant she hadn't drowned. But if she was alive, it also meant she had been taken, trapped, controlled by forces beyond her will. The years brought more whispers. In 2005, a U.S. Navy sailor claimed he encountered a woman in a Barbados brothel who begged him for help, saying her name was Amy Bradley. Before he could act, men pulled her away. Even more disturbing were the photographs that surfaced later, obtained by investigators working against trafficking networks. The pictures showed a woman older, hardened, but bearing Amy's distinctive features. She was posed in a way that suggested she was being advertised, exploited, sold. For the Bradleys, seeing those images was like dying all over again. They fought on. Ron and Iva appeared on television, pleaded with the public, raised awareness, and offered a $250,000 reward for information leading to their daughter. They criticized Royal Caribbean, holding the company responsible for failing to act in those crucial hours. They said the cruise line cared more about its reputation than about Amy's life. And they carried their pain into every interview, every courtroom appeal, every desperate plea for leads. More than 25 years have passed since that night on the Rhapsody of the Seas. Amy Lynn Bradley remains missing. The FBI still lists her case as open. Age-progressed images show what she might look like today in her late 40s. The Bradleys have never stopped searching. They know the odds. They know the darkness that human trafficking leaves in its wake, but they also know their daughter, strong, independent, defiant. And they hold on to the fragile belief that if she is out there, she might one day return. And so her story endures, not just as a mystery, but as a warning. A reminder that even in the most controlled of environments, surrounded by thousands of people, safety can shatter in an instant. A reminder of how quickly a vacation can become a lifetime of grief. And above all, a reminder that behind every missing person poster, every headline, is a family that will never stop looking. The ocean still carries the echoes of that night. The laughter, the music, the cigarette smoke curling into the dawn. And somewhere in the silence between waves, the unanswered question that has haunted the Bradleys for decades: what really happened to Amy Lynn Bradley? The Rhapsody of the Seas sailed on as though nothing had happened. But for the Bradleys, every minute was agony. They pressed crew members for answers, asked to see security footage, begged for a coordinated search, but they were stonewalled at every turn. Royal Caribbean staff gave them empty reassurances while life aboard the ship returned to normal. Passengers filled the lounges again at night, laughter echoed down the halls, and the band struck up their next set as if a young woman had not just vanished from among them. Ron and Iva couldn't comprehend it. To them, the ship had become a crime scene, a floating prison of unanswered questions. But to everyone else, it was still a vacation. That disconnect was crushing. The Bradleys paced the decks, hoping for a glimpse, praying Amy would appear at the railing, but the hours stretched into days. By the time the cruise ended, no answers had come. They left that ship not with their daughter, but with the unbearable weight of knowing she was out there somewhere, lost to them. The investigation limped along. The FBI eventually stepped in, but jurisdictional nightmares hamstrung every move. International waters meant layers of authority. The Antilles, local Caribbean police, U.S. agencies. Each pointed to the other, each limited by bureaucracy. By the time agents were able to act, crucial evidence was gone. The ship had sailed. The passengers had dispersed. If Amy had been taken ashore in Curiaco, she was long out of reach. But the story didn't end there. In 1999, hope surfaced. Cruel, fleeting hope. A Canadian tourist on vacation in Curiaco claimed he saw Amy on a beach, flanked by two men. He noticed her tattoos, distinct, unforgettable. At the time, he hadn't recognized her as a missing woman. It was only later, after returning home and seeing her case on television, that he realized what he had seen. The Bradleys latched onto that report, desperate for it to be true, terrified of what it implied. 6 years later, in 2005, came another jarring account. A U.S. Navy sailor said he had encountered a woman in a Barbados brothel. She whispered urgently that her name was Amy Bradley and begged him for help. Before he could act, men pulled her away. It was the kind of testimony investigators dream of. But like so many in Amy's case, it slipped through their fingers. No rescue followed. No arrests were made. Just another fragment added to the puzzle. And then, the photographs. Disturbing images obtained from a website tied to trafficking networks, but no new leads. We may never know what happened to Amy Bradley. For her parents, this trip changed their lives forever, but hope remains. Leave a like, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep bringing you the truth that matters.